Hello there, welcome back to Beauty Bee, where we love build your own palette design tools. And I was so excited when I saw that Colourpop was bringing back theirs, because I remember having some good times with that back in the day. But, well, let's start this video by saying that originally I was planning on this being some kind of BYOP with me using the tool, and I was just underwhelmed. That's not to say that you can't build a pretty palette from their palette builder. I mean, I built two that I'm really quite happy with, and a third that I think is pretty. I think would really suit some people quite well, but isn't really my vibe. And I don't know, I thought we would change this into a little bit of here's some palettes that you could put together using Colourpop's site, as well as here's why I think that this build your own palette tool isn't as fun, and the offerings that Colourpop has are not quite as good as they could be. If that sounds interesting, first of all, definitely stick around for the rest of the video, but also consider subscribing. I think you might like it around here. Let's start by just talking through the basic stats of the Colourpop build your own palette. You can build a small palette, which is 12 shades for $24, or you can go to a larger palette, which is 24 shades for $45. And for the sake of comparison, the individual pans on Colourpop's site are usually $4.50 each. So that would mean that a 12 pan palette would be $54, and then a 24 pan palette would be $108, I think. Yes, I'm doing my math right. So let's take a look at the three palettes that I pulled together. Let's start with the one that I kind of like, but I just don't feel is really my vibe. I feel like this is a slightly updated version of Modern Renaissance. You've got those pinky tones. You go a little bit brighter than Modern Renaissance does into this sort of cherry red. That's quite a bold shade. But you also have a lot of gold. You have a lot of neutral. You go a little bit into peach, but there's nothing too orange in here. That is largely a preference thing. There are some oranges available. I just don't really like orange eyeshadow, so I chose to keep things a little bit more on the neutral to pinky berry side of Modern Renaissance. And I think that this is a pretty palette. I don't think it's super inspiring. I don't think it is something that would necessarily be worth it for most people. I feel like you can get something very similar to this for much less money. I mean, yes, this is only a $24 palette. However, I feel like even from Colourpop's range, you could probably pick up two $12 palettes, and better yet, you could probably pick up two $12 palettes on 40% off sale. So why do I make myself do math on the spot? So that would be $14.40, and you would probably get a pretty similar color scheme. This next palette is much more catered to me specifically. I prefer cool tones over warm tones, and I tend to really like a pretty light look. Not light as in there's very little color on my face, but I like light shades. So with this palette, I wanted to build sort of an everyday neutral base, but then add in quite a bit of cool toned color. And I think you can see that in the final result. The left half of this palette, wait, is it left on this side? I think left is this way for you. Anyway, the left half of this palette is very much cool tone neutral. I mean, it's matte white, sort of a light pinky beige, brown black, as well as a metallic silver, which, by the way, if you are in the market for a metallic silver single, On a Whimsy from Colourpop is a great one, and it is available, or at least it was available when I put together these palettes a couple days ago, as part of the BYOP. So if you are looking at this tool with the intent of purchasing, I would highly recommend that shade. And then additionally, there's a, I don't know, like a cool pinky rose gold shimmery neutral as well. Super everyday. You could put together a look just using these shades, and I think I at least would be very happy with it. Then on the right half of the palette, we go a little bit more colorful. So we have two sort of minty green shades, both shimmery, one a little bit lighter and brighter, the other one a little bit deeper, and I believe that this is a duochrome that has a little bit of red to it, which I thought was very interesting. Next row is more of a light pink, and then on the bottom we have a little bit more purple. I would say that there's a sort of a purpley pink and then a berry violet shade. I feel like I could get a lot of different looks from this. It seems like something that I personally could reach for most days when I do my makeup. Yet if someone had some basic warm tones and then something like this, they would have all of their basic bases covered. Anything extra is just frosting, you know? And finally we get to this really bright, fun, colorful palette. And I think that this is a really nice little palette because though it is very bold and very bright, I think it would actually be quite wearable. And the reason I think that is that every shimmer has a corresponding matte that I think it would look really nice with in a look, and many of these shimmers have multiple different mattes. With this palette, I started with these 7 actually pink purple shades, and then I added some blues and greens to round things out. I think that the greens and the blues with the pinks provides a really nice, interesting contrast. You could do some really lovely looks where you maybe were using pinks all over your lid and then in your crease, but used some bright blue or bright green as liner. I could see that being really cute. You could almost do like a Technicolor watermelon look with this that I think would be adorable. And just overall, I feel like this would be a really fun palette to play with. I feel like I already have most of these shades, so I'm not tempted to purchase this, but I admit that I thought about it for a minute or two right after I pulled this one together. And unfortunately, that was the only palette that I pulled together that I was really, really happy with. And I think there's a few different reasons for that. A big one is that the shade selection from Colourpop is really pretty limited as far as their BYOP goes. I do think that they have all, or at least almost all, of the shades that they have in these individual pans available in the BYOP, and that comes out to 91 shadows, which sounds really impressive. However, they're not great about restocking things or keeping things in stock, which is a pretty common complaint with Colourpop. And when I put these palettes together on Friday, so 3 days after this tool had become available, there were 14 shades that were already out of stock. So we were from 91 shadows, we're now down to 77. And then additionally, there are 13 pressed glitters. And personally, not really into pressed glitter. Don't hate it. Wouldn't hate, for example, getting it in a pre-made palette. No big deal one way or the other to me. But I don't want to pay for a huge pan of pressed glitter that I'm going to use, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. So if you take out those 13 as well, you're down to just 64 shades. And the shade range that is available is just very strange. There's not a lot of super dark shades. The deepest shade is, of course, a black. Fair enough. But then if you go a step lighter than that. You don't have any super, super deep browns. You don't really have any crazy dark blues or greens or purples either. It's like you have to sort of dial down depth 2 or 3 notches to start seeing a nice variety of shades. And while that's okay for someone like me who really doesn't care for a whole lot of depth, even I was finding some difficulty in making palettes that looked different and had dimension to them without just constantly relying on one black shade. Color offerings also are not very well balanced. For example, there are 3 very similar reds. There's one that I would say is more of a cherry red, one that is slightly more coral, and one that is a little bit more orange. But they're all really, really quite similar, and they're all mattes, and then in comparison you have one total matte green. Why? Colourpop does have a nice variety of greens in their pre-made palettes. They've got Just My Luck, which is just a green palette. I want to say it's Boudoir Noir, which is a very like olive gold palette. The Child is very greenish, but that doesn't really translate into their singles range at all. I do not know that Colourpop has really introduced a whole lot of new shades since bringing out their singles range, which has been a few years at this point, and I think that it shows. You do have the occasional pop of color, but I think that makeup as a whole, the beauty community's preferences as a whole, have definitely gotten a little bit more colorful over the past couple years, and this range doesn't reflect that. This range feels like it is still caught in an era where people thought that the modern Renaissance was a very colorful palette. And compared to what was available on the market at that point, it was pretty colorful. This range, to me, feels very stuck in the past. It feels like it could use some revamping. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that they don't have a lot of color. I could see this being a route to make your perfect neutral palette. However, when I tried to make that perfect cool tone neutral palette, I ran into the problem that there really aren't a whole lot of cool tones. They don't even have a really nice range of neutrals in this line, which I feel is very strange. It adds to this feeling of imbalance in their range, and I think that if Colourpop wants to continue to have this tool, to make this tool available, and really keep people interested, I think it would really behoove them to add some additional shades, really bulk up their colors, add some more neutrals, and add a little bit more depth. That would make this a lot more usable and a lot more interesting. And for my personal tastes, because build your own palette makers online are a hobby at this point, it would also be a lot more fun. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know if you have ever used Colourpop's BYOP tool, and if you've ever purchased the palette you made. I would be really interested in hearing how that worked out for you. Thanks again, and I really hope I'll see you all next time. Bye!